Well, as has become apparent, Australians will most likely be going to the polls sooner rather than later. And the question they need to be asking themselves is, who do they trust to lead this country based on facts as opposed to ideology? Who do they trust to put the interest of the Australian people and the national interest ahead of ideology? I rise today to take note of the answers that were given to a question about Minister Plibersek's decision to lead to the failure of a project to create a gold mine which was going to be delivering jobs. Now, this is a government that said that they were going to be transparent and they cared about workers. But what we see last week, a project that had passed all of the federal and state planning approvals, had the support of the Environment Department that Minister Plibersek oversees, and had the support of the local Aboriginal Land Council near Orange, who are the statutory body with cultural authority under New South Wales legislation. All those groups said this should go ahead and there are no cultural issues for Indigenous Australians, but Minister Plibersek was persuaded to rule against the proposal for this mine, a $1 billion gold mine, after listening to a dissident Aboriginal corporation that's registered with just 18 members who only list their first names on the website of the Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations. And this is a corporation that has had complaints made about it before because of a lack of transparency. Now, not only does this deny Australians jobs in that case, but what it does is it introduces sovereign risk at a time when we need investors to come to Australia to invest in projects that will help in terms of growing our resources base, because they're the things, if we look at Australia's GDP, it's actually our resources that are a large part of what funds good healthcare, good education, roads, infrastructure, defence and a range of other things. But this is a consistent pattern we see where ideology drives the actions of this government. The cost of living is a huge issue for Australians. And so you would think that the constraints that drive up the cost of things like electricity, such as availability of gas, that the government would be going all out to make sure that we got more gas into the system. And yet, the Environmental Defender's Office has received more funding from this government so that they can continue their activities against resource sector companies like Santos. And eventually, the court system works, and so in January this year, the courts found that the EDO actually tutored their witnesses and relied on conflicted evidence, and so the case was thrown out, and so eventually the Santos development of a new gas field in the Barossa Fields can go ahead. But it's at great cost and great delay, which ultimately will be passed on to the Australian people. So the Albanese government's prepared to fund that. They're not prepared to challenge the decisions that were made on similar grounds when the environmental site, the waste repository at Kimber was knocked back by a court, and everyone was flabbergasted because it changed the whole basis, that decision, of freehold land and the rights that an owner had to dispose of that land as they saw fit. But on this issue of mining, if we see sovereign risk rising in the areas of energy and the areas of mining, we also see sovereign risk rising to our ability to be the reliable partner to our alliance partners, to like-minded nations, where we talk about things like critical minerals. And for those who aren't aware, gold mines are often the same places where we see reserves of things like aluminium, which is a critical element in semiconductors and electronic EVs and other defence and modern technology-related issues. And so if we can't get investors to invest in things like the Hillgrove deposits and others because of this sovereign risk, then we will not be able to be a reliable supplier of the critical minerals that are needed to overcome the kind of coercive supply we see coming out of the Chinese Communist Party. So when we go to the polls, Australian people should ask, who do we trust to govern transparently and in the national interest.